Okay. All right, guys, we are live. Thank you for everyone who's in the live chat already. Thanks everyone for joining us. So today I've got a great conversation for you guys. I've been meaning to have this conversation for a while, so I'm happy we were able to actually get this done today. Please help me welcome to the show the co-founder of Hindu American Foundation, Suhag Shukla. Suhag, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sham. I'm happy to be here.
No, it's fantastic to have you. Let's start from the very beginning, Suhag. What was the motivation for creating an advocacy group for the Hindu American community in the US?
In a succinct way, it was to fill a niche and an unmet need. The co-founders, most of us were born and raised here in the United States, so we're second generation Hindu Americans. Grew up in homes that instilled the values, taught us the traditions and the stories, and so gave us a sense of identity, of purpose, of values, so Hindu culture and Hindu values informed all of us. But what we found was that once we were in our everyday lives of school or work or the public, there was a disconnect between how we saw our tradition and how others viewed us and our tradition. And so how were we to kind of bridge that divide? We looked at other communities because this is not something that's unique to us.
Sure.
Every community has that some level of misunderstanding. Of course, there's a spectrum. I think there's a wide spectrum of misunderstanding for us, but that's because we're a fledgling community, at least as a diaspora, so that need we wanted to meet. And then one of the other successes that we saw, or the key to success that we saw for other faith communities and just other interest areas, was that they all were looking to a professionalized model, that you get full-time staff that are dedicated to interacting and engaging with people who shape and make the narratives about us, whether that's through media, whether that's through policy, whether that's through interfaith engagement. And so HAF was born.
You bring up the point that's, I think, very relevant here, which is, the weird understanding of Hindus in America, of course, and I think in the West in general. There's a strange understanding. There's two kinds of understandings. There's the older understanding, which is, which comes with the pejorative meaning around the word pagan, because India is one of the few ancient cultures still alive today. Hindus are, and so there's that understanding, which is the more Lululemon sort of hot yoga understanding of India, right? And then there's the other understanding, which I believe is more recent, which has become more cemented among the sort of Western psyche, particularly with the rise of sort of Modi and a bit more self-assertion of the Hindu community in India, which is like, oh, these evil people, look at what they're doing to all the people in their own country. So there's these two kinds of understandings of the Hindu community in the West that I've noticed, at least in my time here. What do you see more of? Do you see more of the Lululemon Hello Yoga, or do you see more of the other one?
So I think I think I would even add a third into the mix that oftentimes informs one more than the other, and that's the colonial narratives of our tradition, right? And so there is rooted in some of the latter that you described in terms of a fear of Hindu hegemony or Hindu majoritarianism. Underlying that are, I think, some of the colonial narratives. Right. Sometimes those narratives infect the kumbaya, one world, one love view of Hinduism, which I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Right.
There's more truth in that viewpoint than I think in the latter.
Right.
Because I oftentimes think, like, what would, an imposition of pluralism and a quest for truth, because I think that's the heart of our tradition.
Yes.
What would that look like if you it just doesn't, there's a cognitive dissonance there, right? Of really, if you stop to think about it. But I do think that old colonial narrative that's rooted in even in old Indology, and I'm not an expert in this area, but there are people like Joydeep Bachi or Vishwa Adluri who have done tremendous work in this area, really digging through some of the German roots to Indology, right, and the quest for a a racist theory that they were looking for, like a superior race. And so that infects, I think, this latter. Right. But I do think the root cause is colonial or Western, those old ones that came about with the first interactions with India.
Yeah, and that sort of colonial understanding of Hindus and Hinduism that I think you say that pervades most of Western understanding of Hinduism. A very good example of that was the whole California textbook issue, where I think the Hindu American Foundation was quite heavily involved, and that once you read some of the descriptions and how they describe Hindus and Hindu culture and symbols and traditions and stuff like that in those textbooks, those are things that kids of a non-Hindu background are reading in America and across the country, of course, and they get a very strange, a very sort of Western curated idea of what the Hindus are. They're not hearing from Hindus at all. It's basically you're hearing the story of a nation from a completely different people.
Right. Non-Hindus. It affects Hindu children. Yeah. So I'm a case in point. Ninth grade is when I learned what caste I was, because my ninth grade white history teacher asked me that. She had me get in the middle of class. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area when it was not the diverse haven and tech. This was in the late 70s, mid 80s, that, I was one of a handful of Indian American and Hindu students. And no one would even bring up religion back in those days. This whole wearing religion on one's sleeve is, I think, largely a post 9/11 phenomenon. And I think it's a good one, because we were just suppressing something that deeply informed our ways of being as people. So, ninth grade, she has me stand up. She asks me, what caste are you? Have your parents arranged your marriage? I'm 13.
Wow.
And are they saving up for your dowry? Meanwhile, my classmates are also thinking that India has no electricity, that we live in trees. I mean, this is the general narrative. And this is, mid 80s. We're not talking about...
3 years ago, I was in New Zealand, and a friend of mine asked me if people in India have refrigerators.
Right. Exactly. And this is the type of freeze frame, first of all, that it's like you take a sliver of history, and even that, you don't show accuracy even in that one sliver, right. And therein lies the problem, right? So oftentimes, and the opposition to many of the efforts of the Hindu community and HAF was, these groups are trying to whitewash history and whitewash the ground realities, and that's not at all right. What we were looking for. We were looking for accuracy. And we were looking for parity or equity. So if you look at the presentation of Christianity or Buddhism or Islam or Judaism, they focus on the teachings, right? Not what the people do with the teachings. That's important. Right. But you have to distinguish the two, because you have the ideal and you have the reality. And very often the reality falls away from the ideal. That's why it's called an ideal. Right. In Hinduism, you didn't have an explanation of the ideal. You had an explanation of reality. And even that reality as if it's static and never changing. And so you have a gross disparity between how Hinduism is taught and how other traditions are taught. So let's take the caste system, for instance. Caste is a reality in India. That many people have suffered is a reality. But to conflate that with Hinduism is akin to conflating slavery, let's say, with Christianity or with Islam, where the texts refer to those things and then people have misinterpreted and used religion to justify certain social practices or social evils in that same way. But that conflation for Christianity or Islam are not made.
Yeah.
But in Hinduism, they are. So all we're asking is, let's separate the two. Teach religion as religion and what the ideals are, and then we can talk separately about, how people have used or misused religion, because what we miss there is how religion can be a force for good. And we
Right.
always relay it as a source of evil, and that's problematic.
Yeah, that's fair. So, like, if you want to just give some of the people that might not know a little bit of a background over the sort of California textbook issue, because there's a very strong lesson in there that I'd really like to bring out once you do. So, if you want to just give people a little bit of the background of the California issue.
Sure. So, California is perhaps California and Texas, two of the largest states in the United States, because I know you have an international audience.
Right.
So, in each state can dictate what is taught in their public schools. And second, they can even get into the fine line detail of what topics and subtopics are covered. Now, in California and in Texas, there happen to be public processes to provide the citizenship of those states to offer their input on specific areas in social studies and math and science. So the two that tend to get the most reaction and most engagement from the community are science and social studies. Science, because there are a lot of faith communities that don't believe in evolution. They want that sort of stuff taught through the science curriculum. Social studies, naturally, because they are going to be covering the histories and sometimes religion. Right. Now, religion in most public schools in the United States is taught anywhere between 6th grade and 11th grade through social studies. So the way that Hinduism and ancient India have traditionally been taught, there's, I would say 3 to 4 high-level areas in which there's problems. One is origins. Up until recently, many of the books, if not most, promoted Aryan invasion theory, something that has largely been debunked in the academic world. So the books were not keeping up with the latest. Now, the original theories on Aryan invasion and those things were linguistically based, right? But now there's genetic evidence, there's archaeological evidence. The books were not keeping up with that. So that's an area where we were saying, well, look, if this is an area of debate or historical uncertainty, teach children that. Let them know that there's uncertainty.
Right.
Is my signal still clear?
You're frozen up a little bit, but I can still hear you.
Lost.
Oh, there you are. You're back. There you are.
Are we back?
Yes. Yes, I can see you now.
You can still hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good. We're back in. Okay, so one was the Aryan invasion theory, so origins. The second is just basic belief system. So not even, I don't like to call it a belief system, but basic philosophy. Right. Where simple concepts like dharma, karma, samsara, moksha, none of these things are explained with adequacy. Third is social structures. So the caste system is presented as a hierarchy without necessarily historical context of how those things have changed, how the system was fluid at one point in time, and how it rigidified, what things caused it to become rigid, and how are things changing now. So there's thousands of years of history there, which one little sliver is given, and that too is not necessarily an accurate one. And then the third area oftentimes deals with the way that the relationship of women and religion are taught. So, Hinduism is it's the only major tradition that has Shakti worship as so central to our tradition. There's no mention of that. So these are kind of some of the high-level problems with the way in which India and Hinduism are taught. The other issue is also what compounds this narrative are oftentimes the photographs and imagery. Because we're talking about children in 6th to 9th grade. They're really going to be influenced by pictures. So there's pictures of cows eating in dumps or women picking up trash. There was one time, one book had a picture of a Muslim man doing namaz, and the caption said, "A Hindu Brahmin offering prayers."
What?
So there's, photographs or images that promote stereotypes
Right.
or inaccuracy. So that's kind of a quick overview of what the challenges are with textbooks here in the United States.
And with the, I think the important lesson there is that I think you guys took a very different route to, I think, what a lot of people tend to do in India when they face an issue. In India, they face an issue. It's in a lot of places and in a lot of cases, I see a lot of outraging, but not a lot of concrete solutions. But Hindu American Foundation actually took the legal route and went to look for a proper solution to the problem, because it would have been easy enough to just outrage and then move on. But there was actually, there was an actual pathway to find a solution to this problem, which I think is a real lesson, because I think a lot of people in India take the legal route or ignore the legal route almost entirely. You see any problems, whether it's, now people are starting to realize, okay, for the past like 30 years, people have been screaming for, getting the temples in India free from government control, for example. That's just one example. But now people are realizing that, okay, there's a legal route, there's a legal solution to this problem. So people are approaching the courts and they're like, all right, is this, is the government controlling all these temples? Is that a legal thing? Can we get them free? So there's actually some movement on the issue. And I think that's a much better way to take, because I feel like in the community, in India particularly, there tends to be more, in some cases, of course, more outrage than actual, looking for solutions.
Well, I think that outrage is something that's becoming more and more prevalent, even here. Sometimes I honestly feel like, when we look at the polarization that's occurring here, there's a lot of outrage on both sides. Yeah. But if you really want constructive change, outrage might have a place in it. It could be part of a strategy, but it's not a constructive strategy. The other thing is, in addition to know-how, we're very fortunate to have lawyers on our team who can understand and wade through these processes and recognize when the state is working outside the bounds of what it's supposed to be doing. But the second thing is patience. That a legal strategy may win you short gains, so you have to be in it for the long haul. Right. So oftentimes what we're interested in is institution building. It's not just an organization. That what is HAF going to be able to lay the foundation for 20 years down the line? What's the third executive director going to have in their toolbox to be able to continue to advocate for the changing needs of the Hindu American community? Because those are going to keep changing. My children are going to be less attached to India. My parents came from India. Yeah. But even myself, I don't have as many family members there anymore. They have even less. So the needs of the community are going to continue to change. But you do need to have patience. You also have to have resources. Right. I mean, look, these things, money. So it's not a luxury so that everyone can afford. But as an organization, we're here as the community, to serve the community, to say, okay, let's all put our money together and we can go out with one voice. And that's oftentimes difficult too, because you put 5 Hindus in the room and you have 7 opinions, maybe 8. So, that's going to happen. I think that's healthy. That's also in some sense the beauty of our tradition and our people.
No, that's fair. One of the, I feel like, large challenges that exists for the Hindu American Foundation and many individual Hindus in the West as well is just, and we were discussing this offline, this just trying to fight back against just this massive wall of misinformation, whether it's from the media, whether it's from eminent quote-unquote intellectuals, whether it's from other advocacy groups themselves, and I feel like that's something that I can imagine uh, that you have to deal with on a pretty regular basis with the Hindu American Foundation, and I bet that's something you find frustrating.
Well, just over the past 2 weeks,
Right.
with the abrogation of 370 and 35A, it's been just all hands on deck, in terms of trying to reach out to relationships that we've built in the media to say, hey, listen, you all are just covering one side of
Right.
this. There's a whole lot more that we actually have to go way back. We've got to give history lessons.
Right.
Because people don't even know, you can't just refer to this place as disputed territory. It's not.
Right.
So, we're talking about, let's start at the kindergarten level on these things. The other challenge is that in addition to an avalanche of misinformation, what we're dealing with is the comfort that mainstream has, or maybe the complacency. Well, but these are other South Asians who are telling us this.
Right.
And they are ill-equipped to recognize that there might be a political agenda or a political bias or a particular perspective that South Asian or person of Indian origin is promoting. And so that makes it even more challenging, is that they're like, well, we have our brown people, like, aren't you all brown people the same? Don't you all have the same opinions? Well, no, we don't. And so that, I think, compounds the challenge for us.
Yeah.
Is that, okay, great. So so that is the challenge, that when you have people from within the larger community who are fueling those narratives, it's hard.
Yeah.
When people don't know the difference between one brown person and another.
What is the kind of reactions do you get? Like, let's take the abrogation of 370, for example. What's in your interactions with the media, in your interactions with civil society, with whatever intellectuals, with politicians, let's say, whatever it might be, what are what do you hear in your interactions with them that really catches you off guard, let's say?
So I think one is that when we engage with people who are so-called, proponents of democracy and secularism, what really perplexes me is that here is a legal action that I'm not going to say is without its flaws, but I'm not in the inner chambers of government to know
Right.
what security risks and what all that is. But here is a move that legally will extend civil rights and equal protection to millions of people.
Right.
And you have people situation where you have a choice between secular democracy or a religion-based democracy. If you're going to be a proponent of secularism,
Right.
how is there confusion there? And the third, which, having been working on this issue of shedding light on what happened to those 350,000 Kashmiri Pandits who were, cleansed from their ancestral homeland, the indigenous people of the region, to have no acknowledgement of that is frustrating. It's heartbreaking, and it just, I think, really is kind of face in terms of, well, we will pay attention and sympathize with these cleansings, but not this one. And
Right.
and therein lies that hypocrisy that's a little hard to swallow.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a super chat here from Daku Daddy. It's a great name. Thanks, man. He's wondering if you have any idea as to why, despite being a relatively affluent group in the U.S., do you feel like Hindus have been relatively accommodating of this misinterpretation of Article 370 and sort of the spread of all this false propaganda around it?
I wouldn't place the blame on that. Look, we're really only a 30 or 40-year-old diaspora.
Right.
Right? So yes, there were Indians who were here in the late 1800s. A lot of Punjabis came into California, but in large numbers, we only came here after the lifting of the Asian Exclusion Act.
Right.
So that didn't occur until the 60s. So the first 20 years were spent, investing in our temples, in our linguistic and cultural institutions. Now we're beginning to find our civic voice. The other thing is also know-how, that where we have succeeded is in medicine, in science, in engineering, in entrepreneurship. If I went to my parents, even just going into law school, they're like, huh, And before that, I have a bachelor's in religion. I've always been fascinated with this and have always wanted to learn more and more. And so at one point I was even considering a PhD in religion. And my parents said, well, how are you going to put food on the table? So these areas in which we might be able to increase our voice and influence, we still have community, have to be willing to invest and allow those young next generation who are interested in these spaces to enter those spaces.
Right.
And we also need to educate ourselves and our children about history. And that's definitely an area that's frustrating for us, that, where do you find, there are some, but where are the credible sources on Indian history?
Right.
What do you turn to? If you are interested, you're going to find plenty of stuff. And that's changing. You have Sanjeev Sahni, new, young, emerging language.
See people talking about how, people's rights have been taken away, which if that's what you believe, that's silly. And secondly, there's just an absolute refusal to take on board any of the stuff about the women, any of the stuff about the rights of the SC/ST group that were not able to get jobs in the government, that were not able to, get any sort of upward mobility. And under Article 370, they were sort of consigned to a life of just manual scavenging that their parents and their grandparents were doing. And all of these things, there's just absolutely no acknowledgement on the media or civil society or, all these organizations of any kind. And I wonder what in your experience has been the, do you find the sort of Hindu American community to be frustrated on that end?
Oh my gosh. My inbox has been inundated with, I heard this on NPR. I read this in New York. New York Times is a lost cause. So let's, with Bashar Peer at the helm, there's,
goodness.
You know what I mean? It's not going to get any better. But, inundated with emails from, well, this paper said this paper said that. We need more people to be writing letters to the editor. So we actually started an action alert. Again, language can sometimes be a barrier. And I think the key to being heard is to not be so overly emotional. There's a place to be emotional, but sometimes I think the message is lost when, we need to communicate clearly on why this is wrong, present the facts. So on our website, www.hafsite.org, we have an action alert. It's right there on the homepage, and you can, cut and paste, you can add your stuff, but send it to whatever letters to the editor. If we speak up, the editors aren't going to know. Right. The other thing, what boggles my mind, talking back to like women, for instance, imagine if, I am a native Californian. I married someone from Florida. Suppose California had a law that I could no longer own property in California because I married a guy from Florida.
Right.
How preposterous is that? And on top of that my children could not inherit any property because I married someone from outside the state. For so-called, advocates of progressive values, how can you be silent about that? How can you not celebrate the fact that now all Kashmiri women can marry someone and still own property. Like, oh wow, it's 2019 and now they can do that, but let's condemn the action.
Yeah.
Like, it just, the level of hypocrisy in some of the outrage against all this. Again, I think there's a place to be, to express outrage on, communication blackouts and things like that. And, we need all those freedoms that a secular democracy guarantees to come to fore for all the people in Jammu, Kashmir, and Ladakh. But it's going to take time. And so, at the end of the day, the narratives are the narratives, and we need to address them. But the fact is that it's been abrogated.
Yeah.
And life's going to go on. And the people of Kashmir and Jammu and Ladakh are going to be equal citizens. They have been stripped of their second-class citizenship. It doesn't matter whether the New York Times wants to acknowledge that fact or not, because that's the reality.
The New York Times and all of these organizations, they act like Ladakh and Jammu don't even exist. They act like the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir is just that little Kashmir Valley, and that's about it.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, BBC. So just one more thing. BBC promotes this video footage of a protest, and there's Jaish-e-Mohammed flags flying.
There's photos of dead terrorists that they're carrying.
Your own government, BBC, the UK government, has banned this organization. The UN has banned the founder of this organization. The United States has banned this organization. I think Canada, Australia, and I don't know what other country. Most Western democracies have banned the organization. Why don't you allow some protests in your own backyard and promote the waving of those flags?
Yeah. I mean, have some protests in London where people are freely carrying ISIS flags. Have that.
Yeah. Welcome it. Call them a peaceful protest.
Yeah, call them a peaceful protest. Yeah, let them go about their day. It is, that's the dangerous part about it as well, that you're trying to... I understand that there must be some part of the population that is unhappy with this decision, and I completely take that on board. But who are you trying to help is my question. Who are you trying to help by sharing videos of people who are marching with flags of terrorist organizations who have actively participated in the killing of innocent Indian citizens and who are carrying photos of dead terrorists, and they're chanting the names of other, terrorists of Al-Qaeda? Like, how is that helping anyone?
The people who suffer with any form of extremism, right? Whether it's, Islamist, whether it's Hindu, whatever, it's everyday moderate people who are just trying to put food on the table and get their kids educated. That's who suffers.
Right.
So let's take care of those people, right? Law and order, all of these things are critical areas of investment that need to be made in India. And oftentimes, as a result of that, a lot of these issues that are law and order issues do get presented as communal issues. Is there a communal angle? Possibly, not all the time. But, I think that unless you identify the root cause, it's going to be very hard to find solutions. Yeah. But it is clear, whether there's a clear solution or pathway to a solution, that the people who suffer the most are just everyday, ordinary people who are just trying to go about their day.
Yeah, it's true. I also think there's another aspect to this conversation where, spreading this amount of hatred towards Hindus and India and spreading this amount of misinformation towards Hindus and India, it creates a situation, it can possibly create a situation, let's say, where Hindus can possibly be in danger overseas. One example of that, the reason I say that is recently in London, there were some Indians that were celebrating the Independence Day outside the Indian High Commission in London, and a crowd of these Khalistanis and some people descended upon that crowd that was celebrating Independence Day peacefully, and in the name of justice for Kashmir, quote unquote, they started throwing glass bottles and shoes and stones at these people. And many organizations, many journalists and many organizations simply showed that mob attack on those Indian people as a protest against Kashmir. That's what they showed. When they showed that video, they said, oh, pro-Kashmiri people are trying to protest against the Indian occupation of Kashmir. And I'm like, so you're so tied to your idea that you've reached a position where a violent mob attack is now considered a peaceful protest for Kashmir. And that's a very dangerous situation to put Hindus and Indians in overseas, because tomorrow if somebody goes and does something a little more than just a stone attack, are you going to say that this was just an aggrieved protester? Like, where are we going to go with this narrative?
Right. I mean, what we've been seeing in some of the media coverage is almost justifying violence against Indians and Hindus, and it is very dangerous. And that's probably the furthest end of the danger. But there's more subtle dangers, right? That if I'm reading all these horrible things about Hindus are subjugating all these people, et cetera, and I don't know much about it, then how am I going to treat my colleague at work who's Hindu American? If I'm a teacher, how am I going to look upon the parents of my student if I don't know any better? How am I going to look at my neighbor? So there's certainly the overt effect that's physically dangerous, but I think that the subtle effect is equally and probably can be more widespread. It definitely is more widespread, that we have to be mindful of. Look, people should not be, or no group of people or individuals should be so dehumanized because of a political perspective. And I think that's what we are losing. Or it's like the over-humanization of one side and the complete dehumanization of the other. Right. And that's not where the truth lies. The truth lies somewhere in between.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, I've got some American friends here that when the whole news came about the whole Article 370 and its removal, they came and asked me about it. But thankfully, I've got friends that are not complete idiots and who are not like I believe everything I read on the internet. I read it on the internet, so it must be true. They're not that kind of people. So they just came and asked me about it. And I told them, and I said, you know what, when you hear both sides of the story, it makes a lot more sense what's going on over there. So, but you can't bank on finding perfectly reasonable people everywhere. There's tons and tons of people in the world that will believe the first thing that they read. So yeah, that's where the danger is, that subtle danger. You're absolutely right about that as well. I wonder if you've faced any challenges from, sort of other advocacy groups in promoting or talking about Hindus and Hinduism in general.
Yes and no. So, I think that as Hindus, we're kind of interestingly placed where we kind of get knocked down from both sides of the American political spectrum, where some of our advocacy in terms of religious freedom and standing up against or speaking out against the practices of proselytizing and conditioning aid on conversion. We were very vocal during the issue that occurred with Compassion International. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they had violated India's FCRA rules, but they came here and screamed, religious freedom or denial of religious freedom when that wasn't necessarily the full story. So that's where, maybe some more conservative groups here in Washington, D.C. are going to oppose our efforts versus some of maybe, an issue like Kashmir, where some of the left-leaning might oppose our efforts. So in that way, our portfolio places us well to always pursue the facts and pursue constructive solutions, because we can't just join a bandwagon either side, which I think is good. I think it's also very Hindu. I mean, we have always been comfortable with difference. We have Advait, we have Dvait, we have Vishishtadvait. That's our nature. And that's why I think it's actually more and more important for more Hindu Americans to get involved in these spaces, because we can, if you ground yourself in the teachings and methodologies that our tradition offers, you're going to have to be in the middle somewhere.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
hard to go. It's hard to go on either side.
Yeah. No, that's fair. There's a couple of questions on Patreon that people asked me. They wanted to make sure I asked you, so I want to just take a couple of them. Bhakti Joshi, she was asking that, do you feel that with progressive generations of Hindus that live in and that were born and raised in the U.S., do you feel like they sort of lose their sort of Hinduness, or they lose their way of life? Does it get distorted in any way? And there's a similar question from Ankur as well, which was wondering that if Hindu American Foundation has noticed or is doing anything to sort of reach out to the younger generation of American Hindus, because many of them tend to sort of lose touch with their identity and their culture the more they grow up in America. And I've noticed that in whatever small time that I've been here, I've noticed that to an extent that I've got a couple of friends that are from India that are from a Hindu background as well, but a couple of them at least, they make it a point to walk as far away or appear as far away from their Hindu background as possible. And I think a little bit of that has to do with the sort of misinformation campaign against the Hindus as well. They don't want to be lumped in with that group.
I think so. So I think that we should be careful not to, I think, stereotype even our own community, that there's a spectrum. There were kind of two predominant parenting philosophies from my generation. And now I am, probably, I don't meet very many people who are older than me that were born and raised in this country, right? So I'm really like that first set of children that kind of came from that 1960s generation. Maybe a few. I'm approaching 50. So what I find is the two kind of predominant parenting philosophies were teach as much as you can, language, religion, culture, and really, because no matter how hard they try, yes, they're going to be American, but people are still going to ask, where are you from?
Yeah.
Then there was another subset who said, we don't want them to have the same challenges we had. Don't bog them down with a second language. Don't bog them down with all that. Let them be as American as possible. The thing is, to be American can be so many different things, right? Yeah. So I think everyone has kind of found their way from that generation. We didn't necessarily have the institutions and the critical mass to kind of fortify some of those lessons possibly. Now I find that there's a huge cohort of young people who know so much about the tradition.
Really?
And then there's going to be people who don't. You go to a BAPS temple, you go to a Chinmaya mission, you go to Gayatri Parivar, you go to, HSS. You're going to find young people who know more than maybe a lot of adults. American adults. I mean, I know that my kids, when we go back to India, there is a stereotype, but my kids oftentimes know more shlokas and know more, have gone through the Gita than most of the cohorts we're meeting in India. So I think that this is a worldwide issue in terms of really proactively passing on the tradition and teachings and showing the relevance of the teachings. What does a thousands-year-old book like the Mahabharata have to do with us today? Oh my gosh, there's so many lessons. We're dealing with the same sorts of conflicts that they did, but in different contexts today. So making that connection and going beyond the ritual. The ritual is important, but ritual is going to be so much deeper if you understand the meaning behind it. So that kind of proactive approach to parenting, or as communities raising our children, I do see a lot of that. And so one of the ways that we're trying to create a channel to then again take that internal investment and turn it outwards is through Capitol Hill internship program, in which we've had almost 50 young, bright college students come through us, and they intern on Capitol Hill. They either work for a congressional office, they work for a congressperson, or they work for us, or they work for another agency. So they're learning how do you channel the energy from these values and this, perspective that, sees Earth as sacred, who sees that each one of us are vessels of the divine. How do you take that positive, powerful message and channel it to service community, to better society? So our Capital Hill internship is one program. We have another program called Dharma Ambassadors, because you're trying to take thousands of years of teachings and tradition and history. How do you articulate that to your neighbor? So our Dharma Ambassadors program trains people on how to succinctly and in an articulate manner talk about Hinduism, so that you're not using words that, like say the word idol. I hate when people refer to a murti or a deity as an idol. Call it an icon, call it a deity, call it a murti, call it a representation. But when you say idol, and you are talking to someone who comes from a faith tradition that one of their commandments is to not worship false gods, which is what an idol is, well, you've already hit a wall. You have stopped your communication. They no longer hear you. You're doing wah, 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 wah. It's hearing. So, that sort of empowerment. What language is going to work for you? So those are some of the programs that we have, and we have some others in the pipeline in terms of how do we further, because right now a lot of our programs are kind of college aged and up. How do we get them in high school? How do we provide young people the leadership skills and a platform where they can start practicing them earlier? And so hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll be able to launch some other exciting programs.
That's awesome. I think, yoga is such a good part of that as well, because I saw on the HAF website that there's a initiative called the Taking Back Yoga Initiative, where it's, I know it's not necessarily taking it back, like I'm going to take it from you, but it's essentially just a better understanding of what yoga means, because as we were talking about a little bit earlier, in the United States, yoga has been sort of confined to Lululemon and hot yoga and beer yoga and dog yoga. It's the poses essentially is what yoga is, but there's so much more to it. It's an ashtanga, it's an eight limbed practice. It's a massive practice. It's a way of life. There was a very famous American Hindu. I forgot his American name, but his Hindu name is Ram Dass, and he wrote a book called Be Here Now, which is what the essence of yoga is. The essence of yoga is to be aware in the present moment, which Hinduism considers to be one of the keys to happiness, is to live in the moment fully. Away from free from your sanskars, free from your habits, free from your, thoughts and all that, just being able to exist and live fully currently in the moment, which is what yoga is, which is what this thing which has spread like wildfire in the sort of San Francisco, California area, which they call mindfulness these days, which they act like that it's one of the greatest inventions in the Bay Area of recent times, but it's just an old practice of it's an old practice of yoga. So I think that's a very worthwhile place to start in sort of reaching out to not just Indian Americans, young Indian Americans, but also to the Americans, in helping them understand Indians and Hindus and those people better. It's through a better understanding of yoga, because it essentially gives you a better understanding of Hinduism as a concept, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, that was in some sense the motivation behind our Take Back Yoga project. Take Back Yoga, it was kind of a play on words. We were also just thinking that you do back bends and, forward bends and things like that. So you're always using your back too. So, if we were to do it all again, I don't know, because I think part of the titling of that project maybe led to some misunderstanding about it. But what our intent was, that here you have on the one side a lot of animosity or misunderstanding towards the tradition, because, you all have the caste system and you don't treat your women right and blah, blah, blah. And then, but I practice yoga. How do you bridge that gap? And that's through education, that, hey, guess what? This thing here that you're doing that's giving you tremendous physical, mental, and spiritual benefits came from here. And what you know about this isn't necessarily accurate. And so in order to bridge that gap, and also to say that, look, if you think that yoga is just asana or just physical practice, you're not going to fully benefit from it, because that's not what it's about. So that was kind of the intent behind the project. We spurred an international conversation. It started with reading a yoga journal.
Right.
And as I was leafing through this magazine, I found references to the Indian mantras called the Gayatri Mantra or something like that. I'm like, okay, so it's not inaccurate to call it Indian.
Right.
But at the same time, you can't tell me that India is a secular democracy that's multi-religious,
Right.
but then call Hindu things Indian, right? Pick which way you want this to go.
Yeah.
So, we said, look, you can't make Hindu a bad word, the H word. And so we kind of spurred on this international conversation. And then there were a lot of people who said, yeah, of course, yoga is Hindu. And then there were those who said, oh, no, yoga predates Hinduism, which I don't know what that quite means. But regardless of whether we changed hearts and minds, and I like to think that we did change a lot of hearts and minds, we got the conversation going.
Exactly.
Right? And so that's where you have to start. And then slowly but surely, through relationship building, through more conversations, people begin to understand that there's more to yoga than just asana. There's this entire spiritual tradition. Once you start studying the spiritual traditions and you come across concepts like karma, of atma, of jivatma, and all these things, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, now I see why you were saying that. So that is definitely an area where we can build bridges, because yoga is so powerful. I think the International Day of Yoga has been helpful to some extent, but I also do think, and we've tried to strike this balance between, look, if we're going to say that yoga is a spiritual tradition, then say in the context of the United States, where we have separation of church and state,
right,
we should be mindful of where yoga is being taught, right? So, offer it after schools to make it constitutionally okay.
Sure.
Because if you open the door, say, to yoga in school, well, then why not open the door to prayer in school?
Sure.
So those are the types of, nuancing then that you have to do, because you want to balance spreading the benefits,
right, and
spreading the power of yoga, but at the same time preserving the tradition.
Sure.
So it's always a balance, which is what yoga is.
yeah, I do agree with you. I think to an extent, because I think there is still some significant subtle differences between the practice of yoga and prayer, for instance. I feel like yoga can even though it's a distinctly Hindu practice, but it can even be taught as to like a secular audience. If you're an audience that is not an Hindu, you can still learn yoga and still have a spiritual experience without necessarily being ordained a Hindu. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Look, Hinduism is a pluralistic, non-proselytizing tradition. Our teachings are universal, right? When we talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or even if you're doing Om Sahana Bhavatu, any prayer, we are not praying for the well-being and the health of this, the prosperity of a particular people, Saha, everyone. So in that sense, yoga is universul. But it's in the, I equate it, and this is, hopefully people in your audience will not, there will be people who are angry, but I'm going to say it anyways. Champagne. Okay, let's take champagne for an instant. There's a difference between sparkling wine and champagne. Champagne comes from a particular region. Right. It doesn't mean that everyone can't drink champagne. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So this is just about...
That's a good analogy.
Acknowledge the roots. Acknowledge the roots so that we can appreciate the heritage and where it came from. Yeah. But know that the beauty of this tradition and the magnanimous nature of the ancients was that they gave it to all of us.
Yes.
Regardless of who we are, regardless of what color our skin is, what our last name is, what gender we are, they gave it to all of us to benefit from. So for sure, there's that universality of it. But I would also push back a little bit to say that there are certain concepts that will come to heads with other traditions.
Sure.
This idea that you are energy,
Sure.
that you have a soul that's eternal, that comes back over and over again. There are traditions that reject that notion.
Right.
So it's not so easy to secularize it and still call it yoga.
Mm.
And it's better to say, let's just offer it after school, or let's do private funding and
Right.
not get the state involved, right? So I think there's ways around it. But I do believe that if you try to secularize yoga too much, it's no longer yoga.
That's
It's
true.
yoga inspired. It's yoga inspired, and that's
Right.
fine, but it's not yoga.
Right. That's when we get dog yoga.
Yeah, it's a razor's edge. It's a razor's edge, but I think it's an important one that we need to balance.
No, I think you're absolutely right. There's another Patreon question here from Saurav, who's wondering if there are any strategies that the Hindu American Foundation is using to increase the sort of involvement and the collaboration of Hindus in America.
We, I think we do from time to time have action alerts that can be found on our website.
Okay.
If people sign up for our e-newsletters or come to our events, they can learn about those. In the past, we've had great success with getting community members to call their members of Congress on a particular issue that might be hot or relevant to our community. But I think that our challenge, which is not different from most other advocacy groups, is slacktivism. And so Facebook and all these things are very much, I think, contributing to this, where people think that they liked something and that's the end of their responsibility to out change. But no, sometimes it actually takes picking up the phone and calling, or typing up an email and sending. We try to make it as easy as possible. We've been looking into like software and things like that, where, hey, listen, you just have to put in your address, and then immediately your congressman comes in and all you have to do is hit send. I mean, that's how easy we're trying to make it. But we do have trouble getting people to act. And so, I put it back on everyone else that if we present the opportunity, that's all we can do.
Right.
That next responsibility is on the people to say, okay, this is important to me. I'm going to take action. And so, if the people are interested in getting involved, or to, right now already there's an action alert on our website.
Okay.
How you can call or email your congressman, your senator. This is for obviously people based in the United States, and how they can write letters to the media. But there are ways in which if these bodies of people who shape policy hear from enough of us, it's going to open their eyes to at least another possibility.
So what does getting involved look like? What are in some of the ways in which people who want to get involved with HAF can get involved? Is it sort of only the letter writing part, or are there other roles in which people can participate?
We do have some active chapters.
Okay.
We're not a chapter-based model, but we understand that it's important to be at the grassroots, because that's where the action's happening. That's where we also are dependent in finding out what are the challenges that our community are facing, what are the successes that our community are meeting. So San Francisco Bay Area is a good example of a very active chapter that there's a core team. They're getting involved in interfaith engagement. So when there's a local interfaith organization, oftentimes Hindus are not present at those fora. So, after going through, say, a Dharma Ambassadors program, or maybe someone is already comfortable in presenting Hinduism to non-Hindu audiences, they're getting engaged at the local level. We have chapters in Florida. We have a chapter in Houston and in Dallas. So those chapters are probably places that you can get more active with other people. But the Dharma Ambassadors program is definitely a place where you kind of have an inroad. We're also trying to find a way to kind of build more virtual communities of our, people who have been through that Dharma Ambassadors program, and how we can then plug them into stuff that's happening locally, so that they can then become not just ambassadors of HAF, but ambassadors of our tradition and our culture, and go and talk about it and share and educate on their own, on their own.
Okay, that's awesome. Let me just acknowledge a couple of super chats and let me just take a final couple of questions. So thank you to Maz. Thank you to Poonam Abhi. Thank you very much. Aman Prakash. Thank you. There's a thank you very much, Varun Kumar Singh and Deepankar. Deepankar just wanted to say, I'm glad that Hindus over the world are discussing ways of coming together and publicly discussing issues that concern the Hindu community. So thank you very much for that, Deepankar. There's an interesting question from on Patreon from Shakti, who was wondering if you get a lot of questions with that are informed by the Bollywood's portrayal of Hinduism. I wonder if you get any questions regarding that.
Gosh, that's a hard one. I don't know about Bollywood. I mean, from childhood for sure. Like when Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, like those questions came up.
Yeah.
I think that Bollywood. I don't know that like Western audiences are necessarily able to distinguish between culture and religion. Not that there's not a huge overlap between the two, sure. But the things that they're going to come across are maybe weddings. Right. Or like social opposition to two people from different communities or two different religions getting married. Right. I'm trying to think of, there have been instances where religion is not portrayed positively, but I can't think, at least in the last 5 to 6 years, a direct question from a Bollywood movie.
Right. And finally, what sort of, because one of the things that has become such a big factor these days in terms of fighting back against certain narratives and putting out your own narrative has become content. Content's become so important, right? And particularly audio content like the one we're doing now, video content like the one we're doing now. There were a few questions from the audience as well and from Patreon as well about sort of audio or video content that the HAF is thinking of producing because it can be widely shared. People can actually watch it because for some reason people don't like reading stuff anymore. So
I know. Right? As an avid reader, that I'm not happy about that,
right,
but it is
right. So people don't like to read as much anymore. People like to watch and people like to listen. And so is there a focus on, content creation that's maybe down the line for HAF?
Yeah, well, so already, if people, listening, go to our webpage, www.hafsite.org.
Links in the description, guys.
The action alert page, for instance, has some of the videos that we have created on Kashmir. So there's a 3-part series. The third will be coming out soon. We're hoping to create more content like that, but it's resource heavy. Yeah. Each one of those films, you know what production costs are. The better quality you want, the more it's going to cost. Yes. But we do definitely have in our strategic plan more video content. We want to launch a podcast. We understand that the nice thing about listening is, look, I could be driving somewhere and I can listen to this. I may not be able to see the video, but I could at least listen. So there is definitely value in audio-visual content, and we're very well aware of it. And our hope is not just on some of these political issues, but also just our Hinduism 101 content. If you go to our website, there's an entirely robust Hinduism 101 training program where you can learn about basic concepts. I think there's 21 modules there, 21 primers. We use that 101 program. We've trained thousands of U.S. public school teachers. So, we started this conversation about textbook reform. What we decided in terms of, you have legal action as a constructive way of bringing about change. But until those textbooks, look, when you're going through a public process, you are not in control. Right. So you might be able to eke out maybe 50% of what you want, if you're lucky. So what we did is then we created our own training program. look, if that content's bad, fine, here's better content. So we have trained thousands of teachers with our Hinduism 101, teaching about Hinduism with more accuracy and with parity. So those materials too, eventually we want to make into video and podcasts products.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that's such a, I think it's such a need of the day in terms of like the communication, because there's so many, like you go on YouTube, you go on Twitter, you go on Facebook, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of videos about how the Kashmir situation is like concentration camps and all of that kind of nonsense. And there's there's such a great need to be able to create content back that sort of pushes back a little bit. Hey, there's another side of the story here that for some reason or another that they're not highlighting. So yeah, I'm very happy to hear about that as well. And again, if people, so some people are asking the super chat as well, if people would like to support financially the Hindu American Foundation, can they do that on the website?
Absolutely. Okay. Music to my ears.
That's awesome.
Music
yeah,
to my
because
ears.
I think that's another, sorry to cut you off there. I'm really sorry, but that's another important thing that we were talking about that offline a little bit. We were joking about it because, you hear from certain sections. My dad, and he's going to hate that I brought this up online, but my dad, I remember when I was talking to him about the show initially, he said, oh yeah, okay. When I told him about, okay, I'm going to try and, focus more on the show, try and make this like a full-time thing eventually. And he's like, oh yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And then he said, oh yeah, but how's the job going? So in his mind, no matter how full-time this thing becomes, you still have to do a job, because this cannot be considered a job in his mind. And bless him, he comes from a background where you had to, sort of get a job, go to school, get a job, start a family and all of that stuff. But there is still that dissonance among certain people, right?
Absolutely. I mean, from both my parents and my in-laws, my husband's involved with HF as well.
Right.
He, myself, Dr. Mihir Meghani, based in California, Nikhil Joshi, my husband's Suhag Shukla, and a couple of others, we came together to start HAF. And then, they all have their day jobs. They're lawyers and doctors. I'm a lawyer myself. But when I joined HAF full-time staff, I'd hear this, we're Gujarati, like, abadu su karo cho. Like, are you kidding? Like, how are you going to make, this is not a career. But now I think, I've been on staff now for 11 years. I think I hit 12 maybe in September, or maybe 11 in September. It's important that if you value, and look, people who support us don't necessarily agree on everything we say or do, but it's a matter of trust, right? You have to give that space and trust. What's the intent?
Right.
If the intent is right and it's one that is selfless, support it. And I think it's important. People should be supporting your show. As we were saying earlier, I think your content is rare, if not alone, in covering a broad range of topics, and that needs to be supported. It can't happen for free, because we are up against deep pockets and centuries of investment.
And people that are doing it full time. Right?
And people who are doing it full time. Exactly. Now HAF, we went from volunteer, but we knew from the very beginning that we needed a professionalized model. We hired our first staff person, I want to say, in our second or third year of having been established. Now we're up to 12. I hope in the next 5 or 10 years, there are enough young people who say, you know what, I want to serve the community.
Right.
I want to advocate on issues dealing with policy. I want to improve the narratives that affect Hindus and Hinduism. And I'm going to work for HAF. We need more of that. And the way that we do that is for everyone else who's in more lucrative careers, need to support these. I mean, in some sense, that's kind of how Hindu Dharma and Hindu society were based, that we had these different departments and you support one another. So support HAF, support the Sham Sharma show, and support those things that are, trying to make a dent. The dent may not happen. Don't also have unreasonable expectations. Like, oh, now Sham Sharma's on and now New York Times is countered. No,
Right.
it's going to take years and years of and loads of content and all of that to eke out our voice and have it heard.
Right. That I think that's a very important point, and so I would really recommend people that if you like what the HAF is doing, if the message of the HAF resonates with you, if you're in the US, if you're not in the US, if you feel like that's something worthwhile supporting, please go to the website www.hafsite.org, and you can support over there however you would like, because I think it's time, because people, one of the things that you notice in the United States, that if people like something, if people want more of something, they are prepared to put their money where their mouth is. And I think it's time for the diaspora and the community in general to start supporting the worthwhile causes like that. I want to just acknowledge the last few super chats. Vishwajit, thank you very much. Prayash Sharma, thank you. Right is always right. I think he's from Gujarat as well. So he's saying, Gujarati mein maja aavi gayi.
Both saras, chalo.
So thank you very much for that. Right is always right. Soumya Bhatt, thank you. And Poonam, thanks again. And again, guys, go check out the website. It is www.halfsite.org. Check it out. See the various programs they have got going. Support if you find any of the programs interesting. There are volunteer positions available as well that you can volunteer for if you have some time spare. I do believe it is a worthwhile cause, and I really do again want to thank you, Suhag, for coming on the show today and having a conversation. It was a lot of fun. So thank you.
Thank you. This was great. I hope we have more.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I'll have you back in a heartbeat. So thanks
Awesome.
again for doing this. And guys, again, make sure to go check out HAF. And Suhag, if you have any last words for the audience before we take leave.
I'm just going to say that support the Sham Sharma show. You're presenting some awesome content, wide range of topics, and a diversity of perspectives, which is important to remain well informed. And this has been fantastic. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Suhag. All right, guys, make sure to go check out the website. If you like today's episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Any kind of engagement is good engagement. I will see you guys for the next episode, and until then, stay happy, stay healthy, and I will see you guys soon.